Welcome back to CPR. Again, I'm your host, Harold Boy, and we're with Professor Doug Davidson. And we're talking right now about incarceration, about race and that kind of thing. And as you can tell, I'm wearing this Black Lives Matter shirt, and I want to talk about it a little bit before we move on, and I want you to talk about your shirt. and I'm a Unitarian. I'm a retired Unitarian Universalist minister, and I've been focusing on the Universalist part of that because I believe in universal values. You know, the values that we all love our children, our wives, and we want to make a difference in the world, and we want to be involved in artistic endeavor and that kind of thing. That's universal. And I was wearing this shirt, and one of the members of my church came up to me and said, "Harold, if you're a Universalist, why do you wear this?" And you hear it all the time, right? You know, all lives matter, and that is the hallmark of our religion, Unitarian Universalism, that every person is worth and dignity. That's our first principle. But what I said, you know, Joe, some people don't believe this. In fact, a lot of people don't believe that their lives matter. You know, white people's lives, you don't have to say anything. And in fact, what I'd like to do is have a shirt that says, "Powerless people's lives matter," of any kind. And that includes white, black, yellow, brown, whatever. But I want to say one more thing about it is that I've had positive responses to that. That was the only thing, that wasn't really that negative. Okay. But I was in Florida and in a grocery store, and this woman came up to me, this white woman, and she was grateful because she married a black man. And she said even in Florida, there's still that racism that she feels, you know, with her biracial child. But, you know, if this were true, I wouldn't have to wear it. But it's not true. People don't believe. A lot of people don't believe this, right? Isn't that right?
Well,
but anyway,
I don't know if they would put it that way. Okay.
Well, I mean,
if we look at the actual practice,
yeah,
and as we're talking about the difference between the student demonstrations now about the Parkland shootings versus the kinds of demonstrations that happen after, say, young black males were being killed, then it suggests that, like, while people may not say it, and they might not put it that, like, you know, well, yeah, we think all lives are important, but obviously in terms of...
Well, I am saying it in a stark way.
Right.
You know, just to... I mean, there's a lot of nuance.
That's a good point.
There's a lot of nuance. And, you know, racism is reflected in a lot of ways. And I think we're all touched by it to some extent. Even black people have prejudice against black people. Wouldn't you agree?
Well,
just simply because they're black.
Well, a lot of that is, you know, after living for
that's what it means,
centuries under oppression.
So
you start to internalize it. So
it's part of, it's in the air, you know. And it's harder to know now than it was, I think.
Well, I think we could talk about prejudice. Racism to me is something that is systematic. Okay. And really, the thing that makes racism operates is power.
Yeah.
And the difference between a black person who is, you know, criticizing another black person or think that black person is not, you know, behaving in ways that they would think appropriate. The difference is that we don't have the power to impose anything.
It reminds me of Clarence Thomas, who was very critical of his sister because his sister was on welfare.
Right.
You know, but, you know, that is prejudice, and it's prejudice against poor people.
Yeah.
But, so anyway.
But Clarence couldn't impose anything.
No, he couldn't.
He couldn't take her off welfare.
Yeah, you're right.
He couldn't do any of those
right,
things.
Power is the key. Right. You know, power is everything.
Yes, it is.
But anyway, you want to talk about this a little bit, and then we'll get back to what we're talking about.
This is a sweatshirt that was given to me by the wife of a former student of mine, okay? I was working part-time for another institution that, you know, basically operated a sort of University Without Walls PhD program. And this gentleman was married to a Native American woman from the, let's just say, Martha's Vineyard area in Massachusetts. He was a native of Massachusetts from the Boston area. And she gave this to me, I think, at his graduation, okay, when he finished. And she sort of explained to me that this sort of represent, in part, some of her, you know, tribal ethnic groups struggle to try to maintain some of their land and their presence and stuff in the Martha's Vineyard area because of, you know, the extensive development and the fact that, of course, it's highly valued, you know, property and stuff. And so I wear it and I do it mostly in honor of her and in honor of that struggle. to try to keep their culture alive.
Right, right.
And it's intriguing because a lot of people out of New England believe that, all of the Native Americans from that area have somehow or other either left, died, or been absorbed.
Yeah.
And so there's oftentimes a denial
Yeah.
that there are any living descendants of Native American people in certain parts of New England.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. But anyway, they have this sweatshirt.
It's really pretty. I like it.
Yeah, I like
And
it.
that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
Maybe. So anyway, but I wanted to get into talking about this mass incarceration, and but before we get to that, we were talking like in a previous show about the actual history of how police and the judicial system oppress Black people, in particular after Reconstruction, 1876, right? You want to inform people, and I think that's something.
Well,
It's something I didn't really know about until I learned from you.
Well, what happened, I think, is that after the end of the Civil War, and we had Reconstruction, and then people started ultimately sort of passing Black codes,
Right.
and we had the emergence of what is now referred to as sundown towns.
Right.
And so, because there were
You want to explain that? Explain
sundown
that?
towns?
Yeah.
What sundown towns were is that, like, if you were a Black person, people passed actual laws that said, as a Black person, you are not supposed to be inside of the city limits
Right.
of those towns when the sun goes down.
Right.
Okay, so from sun up to sundown, you could be there, but once sundown came, if you were caught on the streets or in the city, you could be arrested.
Right.
Okay, and so they call them sundown towns because the thing was that Blacks knew that after sundown they had to be out of town, and most certainly not go through those particular towns because you're subject to being arrested.
Mhm.
Okay, now these were ordinances that were approved, within small communities, and obviously they were able to get away with it. I haven't heard of any state or state authority saying that they did not have the right to do this. So obviously it was a de facto law, if not really accepted as a part of legal.
Maybe not de jure, but
Right.
yeah, custom.
Yeah. So that's
But talk about how they use Black people for economic reasons.
yeah. Well,
it was slavery again,
yeah.
basically.
Again, after slavery and stuff, of course, you had a lot of people migrating north. Then we had a lot of people just sort of moving around the country, and a lot of them moving from plantations into small towns or into larger cities in the South. Well, if you were a Black person who happened to still remain in the South, especially in that part where we call Cotton was king, if you were caught, because they passed what they call anti-vagrancy ordinances, okay? So if you were standing around on a corner, a group of Black folks, Black men especially, laughing and talking and stuff, and if the local sheriff comes up and asks you whether or not you're gainfully employed, do you have a job, or are you working as a sharecropper for some plantation owner or something, and if you said no, you could be arrested at that point, and you could be put in jail, okay? And you could be, in essence, leased, by the sheriff to work for some plantation owner who needed, some more workers on his plantation, okay? Or if they had county projects and stuff like repairing roads or cutting the weeds alongside of the road, it's sort of like convict labor. You could be compelled to go and work out there, okay? Now, if you work for a plantation owner, as I understand it, the plantation owner would pay the sheriff your fine or whatever you had been charged with, and you have to, sort of sign that contract to work on that plantation for,
For a period of
X
time.
number of years, right?
Yeah. Oh, years, yeah, a long
It
time.
could be. Well, the way
I mean, you could be
sharecropping work.
Yeah, you could be arrested for something minor and be years in prison, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
You could either go to jail or you could be given, a purchase by a plantation owner. Now, if you got purchased by a plantation owner and you have no money, you have no land, so you have no way to sustain yourself. So the way the plantation system worked is that if you have no money, you have no place to live. Plantation owner gives you a house, it gives you a amount of land that you gotta work. And if you need food, they have a company store, and you have to go to the store to get your food, your clothes, and shoes, and all that stuff to sustain yourself until you produce a crop.
Yeah.
Okay. So the original contract says you are a sharecropper. 50% of what you produce, on your spot of land, goes to the plantation owner.
Mm.
But also, what goes to the plantation owner is the debt that you have accumulated in his little company store.
Mm.
Okay. Now, since most people were illiterate, math and stuff, the plantation owner could have them
manipulate,
run up prices and
Yeah.
have them deep in the red to the point where their half of what they produce does not pay off that debt.
So they're owned by the company store, right?
Right.
Kind of, yeah.
And the way the law operated was that you cannot leave that plantation until you pay off that debt.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And if you did leave, you could be arrested and put in prison.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So it meant then that a lot of people ended up being essentially,
Yeah.
sort of informally enslaved again.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they cannot leave this particular plantation because the owner has the right to manipulate
Yeah.
those prices. And if you never get out of that, you're constantly getting deeper
Yeah.
and deeper.
We're running out of time.
Okay, all right.
There's so much to talk. I'm sorry. I wish we had more time. I just want to mention one thing. You mentioned about, people could be, oh boy. Well, I wanted to talk about this, but I guess we're not going to be able to. But I just want to mention, I worked in Vista in Pittsburgh. I lived in the ghetto. And I remember one time, there were these group of young black men congregating in the police stop. And they start hassling. And, part of it is, I think young black men got to understand how to talk to police.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I was talking, Maurice Washington, about, I say, when the policeman says jump, I say how high. He didn't understand that. But, the one kid was talking back to the policeman, and the policeman said, I'm arresting you. He said, why are you arresting me? Mm-hmm. And then the policeman turned around, slammed against the cruiser, and, put handcuffs on him.
Yeah.
And I go, wow, man, I never expected it. I mean, that would never happen to me. And so they're really afraid of, there's fear on both sides. The young black men and the police. There's a lot of fear going on. And, the police are operating on fear. And one way they operate out of fear is being aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that true? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's in part fear, but it's also, I think, a kind of sense of power.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's also a kind of sense of, I have that kind of power and authority over you.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I may not be able to get away with or taking a white youth from the middle class and slamming him up against a car and throwing handcuffs on him.
My nephew is a policeman.
Okay.
In Iowa, Davenport, not Davenport, Rapid City or whatever. But anyway, he talked about feeling comfortable when there was a group of black. I think if it was white kids.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I think we ran out of time. Do you have any last words before we go? And I'm really sorry that we didn't get into this, but any last words for 1 minute? We have 1 minute.
Okay. Not really anything.
You have 30
I just
seconds.
hope that the kinds of movements that we're seeing now, and the fact that we have Black Lives Matter and some other things happening, that a larger number of people are starting to become aware of some of the hypocrisies and things that we need to try to get
I agree.
some better understanding and to begin to sort of build bridges across, racial divides, class divides and stuff, and talk about, a kind of healing process for our country.
Right.
That brings all of us closer together because, we're all in this
Together. Right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So, I agree. It begins with awareness.
Yes.
And it begins with an understanding that we are all in this together. We're all human, and we have a shared.
And we're all citizens. Man.
We're all citizens.
It's our country.
It's our
better
country.
or for worse.
Amen. Yeah. And you're a patriot. I'm a patriotic American.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And so until next time, keep the faith.
Right.